Yes.
Good evening and welcome back for the final session of BGR's New Year's retreat, anchoring our lives in the Dharma. Again, I would turn the mic over to our teacher, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi. Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the evening session of this New Year's retreat. And now we have the great pleasure and privilege of listening to talk, meditation, and talk by Aya Dhammadipa. Aya Dhammadipa is a BGR board member, and she is the founder of the Dasanaya Buddhist community in Alexandria, Virginia. She's been practicing Buddhism since 1987 and is now a bhikkhuni, that's a fully ordained nun in the Theravada tradition. And she's also a Dharma heir in the tradition of Soto Zen Buddhism. And I think her ancestry comes originally from Colombia. So in addition to English, she also teaches in Spanish as a kind of expression of her Latin heritage. And so she will offer us a meditation and Dhamma retreat. And then we'll end today's session with a short video about one of our long-term projects, and then some concluding words, reflections, and blessings. Okay, Aya, so now it's...
Thank you so much for the warm welcome and the
Yeah.
invitation, Bhante. Always an honor and a treat to be here, offering some Dhamma alongside venerables like yourself and Venerable Buddharakkhita. So yes, so I'd like to go ahead and begin with a guided meditation to get us really back into our bodies and our presence of mind. And I'm going to stay with the apparent theme that's been developing here, which is meditation on the breath, mindfulness of the breath. I'm going to offer a little bit different guidance than you've received so far. That's one of the great benefits of having the opportunity to practice with many teachers, to see different ways that the Dhamma shows up in your life. So for now, you can just begin to establish your meditation posture. Sometimes it's helpful to rock the body from side to side, front to back, just releasing any tension or any tendency to lean in toward the computer. And sensing the natural stability of the body on your seat. And from that stable base, allowing the spine to come into alignment and bring you to an upright posture. Or if you're meditating lying down, then lengthening the spine. Feeling that alignment all the way up through the neck and the head. relaxing the eyes, relaxing the mouth. And then beginning to sense the breath breathing the body. Just finding some place where you can feel the sensations of the breath and rest the mind there. Could be in the nostrils or in the back of the throat. In the chest or the diaphragm. Even the echo of the breath in the lower abdomen. Any place is fine. And no need to change it or control it in any way. Just allowing the breath to have its own rhythms. And as you observe the breath, you can really rest the mind in the pauses between the breaths. So again, not trying to lengthen them or shorten them, but just really be present for those natural moments of stillness between the breaths. Allowing all the thoughts and the sensations to just recede in the background, except for the pauses between the breaths. staying curious about the breath of this moment. Noticing those pauses. And having noticed the pauses and rested the mind there, then at the end of each pause, there is the beginning of the next part of the breath. So noticing the pause and staying with it until you can observe the beginning. If you notice yourself trying to control the breath, it's helpful to move the attention down to the lower abdomen. And then, having found the beginnings of each part of the breath, allowing the mind to ride along the length of the breath. Just riding along until it comes to the end. Staying curious about the breath of this moment. Resting in the pause, observing the beginning, riding along the length until you arrive at the end and the next pause. Returning again and again to the pauses between the breaths. To the beginnings, to the length, to the ends. Beautiful. So that's our meditation practice for this evening. And if you have any questions or comments about that, we can address those later. For now, I'm going to go ahead and transition into a short Dhamma talk. And as usual, I'd like to start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So I want to make a shift here because we started our retreat looking at the big picture of Buddhist global relief and of anchoring ourselves in the Dharma, looking at the places that we help around the globe, 65 project partners, hundreds of thousands of people helped. And then we zoomed in on one particular partner, Bhante Buddharakkhita's work with Uganda Buddhist Temple and the various projects that amazingly he has been able to bring into being there in Uganda. And so I want to zoom back out and talk a little bit of big picture again. Because I've been reflecting on this theme that we have, this theme of anchoring ourselves in the Dhamma, anchoring our lives in the Dhamma. And the first question that came to mind for me when I was reflecting on this was, well, why? Why would we do that? What is it that drives that process for us? And when I think about myself personally, and I think about some of the people that have spoken here, think about inspiration. That we have been willing to anchor our lives in the Dhamma because we are inspired by it, uplifted in some way by the message of the Dharma, by the people that we saw living it, by the Dhamma that we see in our own experience. So that inspiration comes in various ways. And one way that we can be inspired is by looking to the Buddha himself, the historical person. A man who lived roughly 2,500 and so years ago, was born in Lumbini, raised in northern India, expected to be part of the ruling warrior class, and instead chose a different way. And what we see about the Buddha in the 45 years that he spent teaching about that way that he had discovered is we see a paragon of compassion. In the morning chanting, we say about the Buddha, we say, Karuna Mahanavo. He has compassion like an ocean, like a great ocean. And we see this in very specific stories about the Buddha that have come to us through the Pali discourses. So some examples are the Buddha coming across. So he was approached by a householder who was well-to-do and who was known for feeding the Jains, feeding the ascetics of a different kind of spiritual path at that time. And he was approached with a question that was supposed to be quite difficult, but as the Buddha often did, he answered the question in such a way that impressed this person. And they said, okay, well, I'm going to become your follower. And he said, well, consider for that carefully, because you will still feed the Jains. You will now feed the Buddhist disciples too. But you can't stop feeding them also. And that householder said, wow, now I really want to become your student. Because that's amazing, right? That you don't say, oh, just feed my people and let those other folks go. Or the story of the Buddha coming to attend to a monk that was sick, that nobody was taking care of because he was so annoying. Nobody wanted to take care of him. And the Buddha tended to him personally and said to the monks, admonished the monks and said, you must take care of each other. Or the Buddha's instruction about the household life, telling folks that they should take good care of their workers, that they should be kind to their animals, that they should care for the plants and the trees. So the Buddha was incredible, is for me and for many people, perhaps many of you, a tremendous inspiration in acts of compassion. Very specific, concrete acts of compassion. Although those would actually often fall into the category of what we would call anukampa. Anukampa is the more active, Pali, the word for the more active kind of compassion. But then also there's the Dhamma, there's the inspiration of the Dhamma. A teaching which tells us that universal kindness and universal compassion and universal empathy and universal steadiness are some of the most beautiful states that human beings can aspire to. And not just beautiful, but powerful and useful on the spiritual path, on the path to awakening to the true nature of this life. Deeply inspiring, deeply uplifting. And that Dharma came into the world out of the Buddha's conviction that anyone who was willing to come and listen and see and try it for themselves could benefit from the Dhamma, could walk this path. That's where that's how it came to us. So the Buddha was in a sense inspired by our capacity also to walk the path. Otherwise, he would not have bothered to do that teaching. Wouldn't have spent all that time and energy walking all over India for 45 years. And then there is the Sangha. So the Sangha, that word originally meant two groups of people. It meant the ordained folks, ordained women and men of the Buddha's time. And it also meant folks who had achieved one of the 4 stages of awakening. And those 2 groups are not necessarily the same set of people, obviously, because there were some folks who ordained who hadn't yet achieved one of those stages of awakening, and there were other folks who were lay who had. So there are different people within different groups. So sometimes you hear the Buddha refer to the 4 parisa, the 4 groups of laymen, lay women, ordained men and ordained women. Mind you that now we see gender a little bit differently. We speak about gender and perhaps engage with gender in a different way. So we might say the multifold Sangha, the manifold Sangha, lay and ordained. But those people are actually proving that the Dharma is not the property of just one person. That the Buddha's confidence in the ability of other people to realize what he had realized is actually accurate. They are actually showing us that it is, you could say, humanity's heritage. The Dhamma is very, very uplifting possibility, reality. Very inspiring. In fact, I would suggest that whether you encounter the Dhamma from a book or from a person or a talk that you saw online or an audio recording, all of that is somehow related, came directly from the Sangha. So when we engage with the Triple Gem, when we begin to find that uplift, that inspiration, then we find also, interestingly, and here's where the twist happens, that there is a call to care. Just as the Buddha demonstrated, just as he exhorted the folks of his time, there is a call to care. And it's a call to care for ourselves as well as for others. So I'm always interested to see when Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi's translations, there's this phrase that you see many times about effort, in which the Buddha says, one should not be shirking the responsibility for cultivating wholesome states. One who has confidence in the Buddha, in the Triple Gem, does not shirk their responsibility for developing wholesome states. And it's a very interesting statement, right? So when you think about responsibility, you might think you need to feed the cat, you need to drive the kids to school, you need to be productive at work, you need to pay the rent or the mortgage. You may think of many things when you think of responsibility. Finish your studies, whatever it is. But the Buddha says, well, actually, perhaps one of your most important responsibilities is to be developing wholesome states. These very same wholesome qualities that I mentioned earlier. Compassion, kindness, mudita, empathetic joy, all kinds of joy, actually. The Buddha speaks of many, many different kinds of joy on the path. Right? One of the critical turning points in his life was realizing that joy, meditative joy of the jhanas, piti and sukha, was necessary, actually, a necessary ingredient for moving forward to the end of dukkha. So cultivating many different types of wholesome states, equanimity, our ability to stay steady amidst a world that is deeply confused, deeply suffering. So we have this responsibility for our, just as Bhante was referring to this morning, this responsibility toward ourselves. And when we take care of that responsibility, that is also helping others. In a way, I sometimes think of it as it's protecting us from our own delusion. Wisdom, the wisdom of the Dhamma is protecting us from our own delusion in some ways. And it's also protecting the world from our delusion. And we don't go and act out in those ways that are so harmful. But rather, perhaps, act out of those wholesome states. And that's the other side of the equation, right? So that responsibility, although I don't think that that's what's intended in that particular line about effort, is much more the inner world. But then once that starts to happen, then we see this external call to care as well. Because we begin to understand dukkha, we begin to understand the unsatisfactoriness or difficulties of life more deeply, to be able to see them and face them more skillfully. So perhaps this call to care comes and we wonder how to fulfill that responsibility for fostering wholesome states in the world and others. So for that, I want to illustrate with a story from my own experience many years ago. I was, I was still a Zen nun, so I was still handling money, and I was a hospice chaplain. I'd been doing spiritual care so I'd had some volunteer time as a hospice, and then I was actually an intern in a hospital for some period of time doing a training. And then I was a home hospice chaplain. Beautiful work, incredibly beautiful work. But I had decided that I really wanted to return to full-time study and teaching of the Dhamma. And so I had given notice at the hospice that I worked for. And so it was my last day of hospice chaplaincy work, at least for the foreseeable time. And so my fellow chaplains and I, we went out to lunch together, as sometimes happens on the last day. And we went out to lunch, and during the lunch, I received a call saying that one of the patients of a fellow chaplain of mine was very, very near death. She needed someone to come and attend to her. And my fellow chaplain was out sick that day. So all of us who were there had gone to lunch, and this one young woman was out sick that day, and it was her patient who was very, very near the end. And the staff at the facility that she worked for had contacted the hospice to say they needed somebody else to come. And this elderly woman was in this very, very nice, actually, very compassionate facility that I was familiar with there in Oakland. So this was in Oakland, California area, the East Bay. It's called the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. And she was of the Jewish faith, which is probably one of the spiritual traditions that I know the least about, actually. But because I knew that my friend was out sick and it was my last day, and so I didn't have many plans for that afternoon, I was just going to go and turn in my computer and my badge and stuff. So I said, well, I'll go and I'll see her as my last patient visit for the day. So I showed up to talk to this person, to see this person in what might be her last hours of her life. This person that I don't know. And so I walked in the room, and the room was very, very dark, but there was a hospital bed on one side and there was a sofa on the other side. And she was lying in the sofa. And I thought, oh my gosh, are they going to let her die on the sofa? But this was that kind of place. If that was where she was comfortable in her last couple of hours, then by all means, they were going to let that happen. So there she was lying by herself in a relatively darkened room on the sofa. And I walked over, and I wasn't sure whether she was even still alive yet because she was so quiet. And as I leaned over to listen to see if she was breathing, she noticed that I was there, and she opened her eyes. And I started to try to introduce myself, but it was clear in the way that she was looking at me and sort of the responses that she was making that she wasn't, sort of cognitively present enough to talk. We weren't going to have a conversation at this point. She wasn't really clear enough for that. But she was aware that I was there. And so she asked me, she actually said to me, why here? Why here? And I looked at her and I said, oh, I'm here. My name is, and I'm here to give you blessings. And she said, oh, blessings. And I said, yes, blessings. So she immediately grabbed my two hands, held out her two hands and grabbed my two hands. And she's still lying there on the sofa. And so I lowered my head for a moment to think about what I might say at that time, what kind of blessings to offer her, sort of looking for the words and what might be appropriate in that moment. And then she said to me, blessings. And I said, yes, blessings. And I continued thinking for a moment. And then she said to me, blessings, 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 blessings. And she almost started sitting up and she was holding my hands very tightly. And I realized in that moment that we were both blessing each other, that I was there to give her blessings, but she, even in her last moments of life, was giving blessings to me too. This beautiful, beautiful moment of compassion on her part, right? And it was lovely. And that was all that needed to happen. So we said blessings, 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 blessings. And we had some time of just sitting quietly together and holding hands. And ultimately, she didn't pass in those next hours. I learned later, she lived 7 more days. Those didn't turn out to be her last hours, which I could tell by how strongly she was holding my hands, actually. But I walked away from that encounter and I thought, right, even when I'm not a chaplain anymore, this is what I'm doing with my life. And this is a choice that we can all make. Even when we are on our deathbed, we can make the choice to be giving and receiving blessings, to be hearing that call to care and responding with care. And that's really what we are doing when we do the work that we do at BGR. We are responding, we are hearing that call to care, and we're responding. Now, we don't actually go out and teach people how to sew or dig a well for them or feed the kids. We go out there and we respond to the folks who are right there holding the hands and knowing what's needed, knowing the care that's needed. That's how we take care of that call to care. And you, by being involved with us, are doing exactly that as well. And maybe you're also doing it very directly in your own life, in your own ways. But what I want to return to is this anchoring ourselves in the Dhamma. So when if I look at this whole picture, what I see is that what I think may be uplifting and inspiring for you in terms of thinking of anchoring your life in the Dhamma is this refuge in the Triple Gem. This is what we really mean when we talk about going for refuge. To turn again and again to the Dhamma as your touchstone, as your inspiration, as your fuel for hearing the call and for responding to the call. And ultimately, you benefit. The folks who receive the care, they benefit as well, right? One of the wonderful things that we get to do in a program like this, or on other times that we get together for BGR, is we get to see photos of the folks who are receiving the care, right? You see some video or some pictures of kids with backpacks or women in schools or somebody with a big plate of food and a giant smile. And that helps us, that nourishes our heart, that keeps us going. So I hope that that you find your inspiration, that you find that you can anchor yourself in the Dharma. That the Dharma, when you do that, you will see that the Dharma will keep you from endless wandering on vast seas, but to help you navigate, as Bhante said, to help you navigate. And ultimately find that port of an ocean of compassion in your own heart by knowing the truth, by knowing the reality that the Buddha has described for us, has walked for us, has shared with us, and has come down to us all this time later. So may you find your call to care, may you find your uplift and your inspiration and ability to respond to that call. That will anchor you in the Triple Gem. I have no doubt. So that is what I wanted to share this evening, very briefly. And I believe we have some time for some comments or questions or other sharing.
Did you want to take a 5-minute break before the?
I think it would be good. Yes, we could take a 5-minute break and stretch our legs since it's evening
Yeah.
and we've all been sitting quite a bit today. Yep. So let's come back just shortly after 8 Eastern.
Okay, or 5 o'clock, a little after 5 o'clock on the West Coast.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so I believe that it's about time for us to be back from our break. And so as I said, if there are folks who have any comments or questions or things that they would like to share or about the talk or about the meditation or about BGR, this is the time. Yes, David, please unmute yourself.
So I thank you very much for that Dhamma talk and inspiration. Sometimes when we talk about the Dhamma, we, as particularly as universal law, it kind of connotes a static, the static thing that, that if we violate, of course, there's consequences and so on. But, more and more I'm coming to see, and in your talk, that there's a dynamic to the Dhamma. There's an activity to the Dhamma that seems to go far beyond our inadequate descriptions of it. And I was wondering if you would comment about that. Am I really off base, or do you, I think you experience that as well?
Oh, yes. I think that it's a very good aspect, very important aspect to point to, David. So thank you for that question. Yes, the Dhamma is very, very dynamic. I think that anytime that we are sort of becoming more and more aware of the activity of karma and how that is activated, impacted by what's going on with our lives, how we're responding to those karmic resultants, all of that is very much embedded in there. And I think that that is very much what is behind the Buddha speaking about us taking care of ourselves and taking care of others. He means taking care in terms of karmic resultants, right? Karmic, or the same thing when he's saying, cultivate wholesome qualities, wholesome states, that's engaging a particular kind of light karma that will move us forward on the path, and that ultimately, as we know, leads further and further to a much, much deeper understanding of this interconnectedness and also the absolute cessation of everything, right? So when we talk about the effects are very, very vast, right? Our karmic effects go far beyond oftentimes what we can even really conceive of, both in good ways and not so good ways sometimes, right? And but to the extent that we can, the Dhamma is helping point us toward using these principles in ways that really engage the positive, engage us toward that realization of reality. Yes, Samangi, please unmute yourself.
Hi. So as I was listening to your talk, thank you, by the way, it was really good. I was thinking about what to focus on. So for example, one extreme could be you could focus on generosity, compassion, and go all the way in that direction and not invest time in meditation and so on, towards nirvana. On the other extreme, you focus completely on meditation and nirvana, and then maybe you don't have time to dedicate and to generous activities. So can you elaborate, how do you, the connection between these? I'm not sure I know exactly how to ask. They seem to have a correlation, but I don't know in terms of actions, how to think about, what percentage, how to go about combining.
Yes. Well, It is a question that everyone needs to navigate to some degree or another, because if you're a practitioner. But I want to steer us away from the idea that compassionate action is somehow like taking time away from the path. So meditation is one way of cultivating wholesome states. Compassionate action is another way of cultivating wholesome states. And so the question is more, I would say, along the lines of, what is it that you feel called to really do with your particular set of karmic circumstances? Now, that said, there are various suttas where the Buddha speaks about the sort of transformative potential of different practices, right? And when he talks about that, he talks about the perception of impermanence and the practice of metta as being the two things oftentimes that are mentioned as some of the most transformative practices that we can do. So again, if you see that those two things are at the top of the list, and you say, oh, interesting, that you might think that just sitting on the cushion and developing the perception of impermanence is the best thing to be doing. But and that was at the top of the list, for example, in the Vallama Sutta. But metta was the first practice that the Buddha suggested to the Kalamas, for example. So it really has to do, I think, with one's karmic tendencies. How is it that we can best utilize this mind and body that we have in this lifetime? And again, really understand this mutuality of benefit that is happening, that to the extent that we're cultivating our own presence of mind, our own clarity of mind, then we are going to benefit the world, if for no other reason than because the way that we behave will be more beneficial in the world, just less nasty to begin with. But also this mutuality of benefit when we are helping others, right? I don't know, Bhante Bhikkhu Bodhi, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, I'd say from one angle, there's a certain tension between them, between the ideal of, call it altruistic action in the world, and the ideal of, say, inner cultivation of the path leading to Nibbana. But also I agree that the way one resolves the tension between them depends a lot upon what one might call one's own proclivities, one's own tendencies, one's own sense of an inner calling. Like some people, and I've known monks like this in Sri Lanka, who just want to utterly relinquish all engagement with the world and just
Mhm.
go off to live literally to live in a cave or in a little hut out in the wilderness and just subsist each day on a single meal gathered on alms round, and then spend the rest of the day in cultivation and meditation.
Mhm.
Whereas there are other monastics, especially monks, who become dedicated to scholarship, to learning the Buddhist texts, the tradition, the classical explanations, the languages, and then to teaching others. And then others become involved with altruistic action, like setting up social services.
Mhm.
I think even somebody like Bhante Buddharakkhita is a very beautiful example of somebody who
Mhm.
initially contacting Buddha Dharma in India and then coming to the United States, spending like 5 years, I think, yeah, pretty much 5 years as a lay Buddhist in the US, taking various meditation retreats, then becoming ordained as a monk, and then living at the Bhavana Society with Bhante Gunaratna for 3 years. So cultivating himself inwardly, then he goes back to Uganda and he's in a completely different set of circumstances.
Mhm.
He's not living in well, I can't say America's a Buddhist country, but he's not living in a monastery where he's able to study and practice full time, but now he has to engage the rest of society to show how Buddhism can have a transformative impact, not only on the inner mind, but how it can bring positive benefits to society. And so
Yes.
he sets up so many of these projects as a way of bringing, call this, altruistic benefits to others.
Mhm, mhm. Yes, exactly. So I agree, Bhante. I think there's a whole range, and we see all of that, and all of that has karmic benefits of various sorts, and
Mm.
also benefiting the world in different ways.
Yeah.
Even that monk, who's just taking the alms round each day
Mm.
is giving at least that, those people who are helping an alms round some opportunity to participate in his path.
Providing an example of renunciation and
Mhm.
dedicated practice. But
Yes.
also what I would say is that even when one is engaged in altruistic action in the world, from our Buddhist point of view, it's also essential at least to stake out a certain amount of time each day to
Mhm.
devote to inner cultivation. Because
Yes.
otherwise it's very easy to get lost in worldly involvements, and then for the mind to be in a state of agitation and commotion. And if that happens, then you might be benefiting others materially, but you're not developing yourself appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
So the
Yes.
best is to strike some kind of balance between the two, but exactly what proportion of one's time and energy one invests in one rather than the other, that depends very much on one's personal disposition as well as one's outer conditions or circumstances.
Yes. But it recalls again that sutta from the Anguttara that you mentioned earlier today,
Mm.
that the best is one who's benefiting others and benefiting oneself. And we need
Yeah,
to really
yeah,
understand
yeah,
that dynamic and tend to our practice as well as
yeah.
to our compassionate action. Beautiful. Okay, other questions or comments? Anything else that wants to be shared at this point?
Okay, I see one hand has come up. This is somebody named Brad, and you can unmute.
Hello.
Okay, there you are.
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah. So I just wanted to share that a couple of years ago, I ran into kind of long distance someone in Bulgaria who would place flowers on the altars in Bulgaria. So I started sending them a little bit of money a couple of times a year to offer these flowers. And then I found out that they also fed children.
Mm.
So I said, please stop putting flowers on the altar. Instead of putting flowers on the altar, please feed the children with whatever money I send you. And it's grown into something, well, for me, quite profound. So I now have two social workers in Bulgaria feeding and clothing children regularly. And it just how it's evolved has, I don't want to sound like it's about me, but just in terms of the qualities that it starts to purify and enhance, and how that uplifts the practice and deepens the practice. Now, I do have to be careful because my accountant says that sometimes I get into a negative cash flow situation where I'm sending out more money than my retirement income is giving back. But anyway, it's just it's one of the great joys of my life to
Yeah.
do that. So I just
Wonderful.
wanted to share that.
Yeah, and this reminds me of something also that one of the there's a group of meditation subjects called the Six Recollections, the Six Anusati, and one of those recollections is the recollection of generosity. So when you
Mm.
practice giving, then you can turn your acts of generosity, your acts of giving, into the subject of meditation. So you
Mm.
reflect back on your acts of giving, and the way it's formulated in the text. In this generation, which is in the grip of miserliness or selfishness, I am one who practices generosity, who practices giving, who lives with open hands, delighting in generosity. And so when you do that reflection, then it causes joy to arise in the heart. And then one can strengthen that joy and make it more and more powerful until it becomes a vehicle to samadhi, to deep concentration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Okay, well, I think we're ready to go ahead and transition then maybe to the next part of the presentation here. There's a video and a
Yes, I will be
Okay,
sharing the
I think we
video
have, yeah,
next.
okay. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think we have the video from Lotus Outreach.
yeah. So thank you so much, Aya, for these beautiful reflections on care and compassion.
Yeah.
And at this point, I would like to share a short video from one of our partners, Lotus Outreach. Basically, our partnership with Lotus Outreach provide wise support to impoverished girl students in Cambodia. So the families basically allows the girl to remain in school. It's one of the projects that's very close to the hearts of many of us at Buddhist Global Relief. So if it's okay with you, let me go ahead and share my screen and share the video.
Oh, is there sound?
You cannot hear it, Bante? So let me stop sharing and share it again.
Yeah, I don't think that the sound was playing.
Okay. So let me see, maybe I can turn up the volume a little bit. Okay, so share screen. I have to share the sound here. Select the video.
Okay. Now,
yes.
នៅក្នុងឆ្នាំ2021ខ្ញុំមានឱកាសនៅក្នុងការចូលទៅក្នុងអាហារូបករណ៍ដែលគេបានផ្ដល់ឲ្យខ្ញុំដូចជាសម្ភារៈសិក្សាកង់និងសម្លៀកបំពាក់ជាពិសេសម្ចាស់ជំនួយ BGR ដែលបានផ្ដល់ជាអង្គដល់រូបនាងខ្ញុំនិងគ្រួសារផងដែរធ្វើឲ្យខ្ញុំមានសេចក្តីរំភើបនិងជួយសម្រួលដល់គ្រួសារនៅក្នុងការហូបចុកធ្វើឲ្យខ្ញុំបានហូបឆ្អែតនិងទទួលបានកម្លាំងមាំមួនជាងមុនហើយធ្វើឲ្យខ្ញុំនេះលែងទៅស៊ីឈ្នួលនៅក្នុងការបោកកៅអៅគេដូចមុនទៀតធ្វើឲ្យខ្ញុំមានតែផ្ដោតទៅលើការសិក្សាហើយនឹងលែងភ័យបារម្ភនៅក្នុងការខ្វះខាតដូចមុនផងដែរជាចុងក្រោយខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណដល់ម្ចាស់ជំនួយ BGR ដែលបានផ្ដល់ជាអង្គមកដល់រូបនេះខ្ញុំនិងក្រុមគ្រួសារ
បាទឈ្មោះជុំហុងអាយុ63ឆ្នាំជាឪពុករបស់រៀងស្រីណុចខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណដល់ម្ចាស់ជំនួយដើម្បីជួយ BGR ដើម្បីជួយឧបត្ថម្ភជាអង្គខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណដល់ម្ចាស់ជំនួយ BGR
So I hope you enjoy watching this short video, which basically gives some sense about the impact of our partnership with Lotus Outreach to provide wise support for these girls so they can remain in school instead of being forced to go into the world and work in unsafe jobs in Cambodia. So at this point, let me look at the program. So before we conclude with some reflections from Venbo Bhikkhu Bodhi, I would like to introduce our Vice Chairperson, David Wharton, who will share a few words about the work of Buddhist Global Relief. David, welcome.
Thank you, Kim. And thank you each and every one for participating in our BGR retreat, anchoring our lives in the Dhamma. I want to offer a special thank you to Bhikkhu Bodhi, Ayya Dhammadipa, Roshi Joan Oberix, Bhante Buddha Rakita, Patty, Kim, and all those staff and volunteers who were involved behind the scenes, helping to create this event, which was so inspiring and insightful. Bhante Buddha Rakita's presentation reminded me of something, and it was kind of couched in my question to Ayya Dhammadipa. It reminded me that whether or not we seek the Dhamma seeks us, that our every impulse to do good, every wholesome thought, word, or deed is a prompting by the Dhamma to recognize our part in bringing an end to suffering. I mean, how else do we explain a man from Uganda going to school in India to study Buddhism or study business, finding Buddhism instead? One beef for another. How else do we explain the incredible work he has accomplished among his fellow Ugandans, teaching children, taking in orphans, digging boreholes? And on a personal note, if it's not the Dhamma seeking us out, how else do I explain a boy from rural Montana whose parents never finished high school coming to the Triple Gem and being here tonight? BGR is another way the Dhamma seeks us out, stirring us to relieve the desolate suffering experienced by so many of our brothers and sisters around the world. And because of supporters like you, those who are in attendance here tonight, this is exactly what we do. Because of you, men and women in the landlocked nation of Malawi, who barely subsisted before, are now learning new, adaptive, and highly productive farming techniques, such as grow biointensive. As in the video that you just saw, young women in Cambodia who would otherwise be denied an education are going to school and on to college. Orphan children in northern India and Bangladesh are playing sports, sitting for a nutritious meal and passing their state exams. Because of you, emergency funds are being sent to Sri Lanka and India to help with the devastation caused by climate change. And families in Detroit have fresh vegetables to eat because of you, because of BGR. The Buddha once said, I say that one acquires merit, even if one throws away dishwashing water in a refuge dump or cesspit with the thought, may the living beings here sustain themselves with this. How much more then does one acquire merit when one gives to human beings? If you were as moved as I was by the chanting, Dhamma talks, meditations, and presentations of the past 2 days, if you feel that you have been blessed as I have by participating in this retreat, I have a simple request, that you make a donation supporting the work of BGR. You can find a link to our website in the chat box below. Again, thank you, and may the deities protect you who are guarded by the Dhamma. And now I will turn it back to Venerable Bodhi.
Okay, thank you, David, for stepping in and sharing with us those wise reflections and those sort of contemplations on the way the Dhamma has a transformative effect on our lives and even seeks us out in the strangest places. You could have also mentioned how a boy brought up in a secular Jewish family in Brooklyn, wandering through a bookshop one day, picks up a couple of books on Buddhism, starts to read them, then eventually winds up as a Buddhist monk in Vietnam, translating some of the major canonical texts of Buddhism, and then comes back and unexpectedly winds up founding an organization called Buddhist Global Relief without quite the intention from the beginning of doing so.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Yeah. Okay. So as we enter the new year, as I use the example of the Roman deity Janus at the beginning of the program today, Janus looks in two directions, back at the past and ahead into the future. And when we look into the past year and some recent developments, sometimes they can be really quite discouraging, even leading to moods of despondency, eroding our hope for the future. I think of particularly some of the recent developments just about a year ago. The war broke out where Russia just brutally attacked Ukraine for no justifiable reason at all. And then perhaps hundreds and thousands of people have been killed in this devastating war. Then we see the manifestations of climate change around the world. Just on today's weekend news, the PBS weekend news, there was a segment on the effects of the deluge that struck Pakistan over the summer in August, so that 1/3 of the country was underwater, and the water is not evaporating. It's formed lakes over areas that were previously verdant fields, fertile fields, providing rice and other food for the country. And so Pakistan is facing a severe food crisis on account of the loss of so much land because of climate change. And the countries of Africa, the Middle East, also face the threats of escalating climate change. Then we also find the rise in numbers of countries of autocratic regimes. And even 2 years ago, Myanmar or Burma, which was on the way slowly and gradually, frustratingly at a frustratingly slow pace, but it was on the way towards opening up towards democracy, at least increasing democracy. but then it was taken over by a rather brutal, tyrannical military junta, which has been completely suppressing the population, so that the country is broken out in chaos. And so when one sees reports like this, it tends to dry up, to wither the seeds of hope that might be growing in our hearts. But still, I always find when we look to the future, we can't let ourselves be overwhelmed by these waves of darkness. We always have to keep the flame of hope burning ahead of us, looking towards the future. But this doesn't mean when I speak about a hope for the future that it's a passive hope, that we just sit back doing nothing, but rather the idea of hope only has meaning to the extent that we contribute to actualizing, to bringing into being the kind of world that we want. And this is what I call the world that will work for everyone, a world that can ensure that we have a viable natural environment, not only preventing increasing carbon emissions, but that we let our natural landscapes grow back, that the world will be covered by verdant forests and jungles again, that other life forms that are being extinguished at an alarming rate can start to flourish again. The birds and reptiles and mammals that make this very beautiful, complex, inconceivable web of life in which human life is embedded. And particularly that we can achieve for human beings the economic security that we all need so that everybody will have adequate housing, medical care, and food to eat, that people can realize their aspirations to live lives of meaning, purpose, and dignity. And so the way we can contribute as Buddhists to following this path of what I call world transformation is by anchoring our lives in the Dharma and using the Dharma as a set of guideposts for navigating our way through the year ahead and the decades ahead. And one of the most, for me, the most meaningful guides for anchoring our lives in the Dharma is the idea of we call adhitthana, which means determination or resolution. And we have this in the Mangala Sutta under a different term. The Buddha says, Pati Patirupa Desavasocha Pube Chakata Punyata Atta Samapani Dicha Etang Mangalamuttamang. It's Atta Samapani Di. That is right personal resolution. This is the highest blessing. So we anchor our lives in the Dharma by making the resolution to embody within ourselves, in our own minds, our own hearts, those outstanding, beautiful qualities that constitute the Dharma. And there are various ways to look at those constellations of qualities. One way is through the classical formulation, the Noble Eightfold Path, molding and shaping our lives on the basis of right view, right intention or right purpose, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Another formulation, which I found especially useful in daily life, is that of the concept of paramis or paramitas. So the paramis or paramitas, the term means spiritual, excellent spiritual qualities or spiritual perfections. These are the kinds of qualities that we cultivate throughout our lives and from the Buddhist point of view, over many lives. We can call these paramis the threads that get woven together to constitute our character, our personality. So just like if you want to weave a sweater, you use many strands of different colored wools and you weave them together, and then you have a very beautiful um, variant sweater of different colors blending together in some kind of pattern. So in our lives, we make the determination to follow these paramis or paramitas, determining upon them, resolving upon them every day to find opportunities to practice them. So we have 10 paramis in the Theravada tradition, and I've rearranged the order a little bit because I think that the order that has come down is a little bit unsatisfactory. So I've rearranged them in a way that I find more meaningful. So we start off with Dana Parami, the perfection of giving, practicing generosity, giving to others gladly with a heart full of kindness and compassion. Then second comes the perfection of ethical conduct, letting our conduct of body, speech, and thought be governed by the pure precepts. Then comes the perfection of renunciation, which might have a monastic uh, tone to it, but we could understand this for the lay people to be able to live simply, to develop contentment, and not to be obsessed by the compulsion to keep on buying, consuming, and discarding unnecessary products. Then fourth comes the perfection of energy, making a vigorous effort to cultivate the path to enlightenment and also to work for the benefit of others. And when we're working for others, then we need the next perfection, which is the perfection of patience. For example, Bhante Buddharakkhita, when he first came to Uganda to teach Buddhism, he was subject to abuse, to scolding, to rejection. So the perfection of patience means that one remains patient under all conditions, even the most challenging conditions, and one remains forgiving towards others, even towards those who reject you, abuse you, harass you. Then comes the perfection of truthfulness, making a commitment to speak the truth and to live in accordance with truth. Next comes the perfection of determination, making the fixed determination to follow the way of the Buddha throughout the course of this life and even in life after life, without giving way to laziness, fear, or doubt. Then comes the perfection of loving kindness, with which I also include compassion. So one develops in one's activities as well as one's meditation, develops the heart of boundless loving kindness and great compassion, embracing all beings within its range, looking at all beings with what I call the eye of equality, seeing every person as a subject of experience, the center of experience, worthy of our care and concern. Then ninth, I've moved the perfection of wisdom, which in the traditional formulation comes fourth. So now, based on all of these other qualities, one develops the wisdom that sees into the true nature of dharmas, the wisdom especially that arises through the practice of insight meditation, dispelling ignorance and lighting up the nature of phenomena. And as wisdom develops, it leads to the 10th perfection, the perfection of upekkha equanimity. This is a mind of balance, a mind that is impartial towards all beings without biases or preferences, a mind that can't be shaken by the worldly opposites, by gain and loss, fame and obscurity, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. So if we ground our life in these 10 perfections and in the Noble Eightfold Path, then we build up the inner strength, the inner fortitude, the wealth of beautiful, wholesome qualities that can then spill out through the force of loving kindness and compassion into altruistic or empathic action dedicated to uplifting the lives of others and also to transforming in a positive direction the country in which we're living, the communities in which we're living, and even the world itself. So let us always, even at the darkest times, keep that light of hope burning, the flame of hope. Okay, thank you for listening to these few words of final reflections. Oh, I see Bhante Buddha Rakita is with us also. Okay. Okay, and now let us see. Okay, so now we're coming to the very conclusion of our retreat. And so we can ask individually Aya Dhammadipa and then Bhante Buddha Rakita to recite just some short chant of blessings in order to bless all of the people who have joined us for this program just last night and today. Maybe Aya Dhammadipa, you can go first.
Okay, yes, thank you for those words, Bhante. And I'm going to go ahead and share a screen because I would like folks to be able to see the English translation of what I'm going to chant here, which is in Pali. Can you all see that? Yes? No? Can you see that?
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah.
Okay. So, as I said before, may you really find your ability to take refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. May you really turn to the Triple Gem as a source of solace, as a source of strength, as a source of clarity in this very confused, hurting world that we live in. And may you hear that call to care for yourself and to care for others. And may you respond with that care and know that you are making a difference. Know that you are really fostering beauty and wisdom and compassion in the world. So I'm going to chant the Pali, and if your mic is muted and you want to chant along, you're welcome to do so as well. Or you can just allow it to wash over you. Akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyang tang anumoditva chirang rakantu sasanang akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyang tang anumoditva chirang rakantu desanang akasata chabumata devanaga mahidika punyang tang anumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang etawata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe deva numodantu sabba sampatti siddhya etawata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta anumodantu sabba sampatti siddhya etawata cha amhehi sampadang punya sampadang sabbe satta numodantu sabba sampatti siddhya Pavagupadaya avijjetato etantare sattakayo pappana rupiya rupicha sanya sanyino dukkha pamuchantu pusantu nibudding sadhu sadhu sadhu. May all be freed from suffering. May all attain peace of Nibbana.
Okay, now we invite Bhante Buddharakita to recite some verses of blessing in whatever way you prefer.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bante. All of us who have attended these retreats, you've been very generous all these years. And I would like to invoke the blessing of the Buddha, the fourfold blessing, the four Dhammas. The Buddha talks about Chattaro Dhamma, the four Dhamma, that means are you, long life. May you have a long life to continue what you're doing. Spreading the Dhamma that is healing the world. Chattaro Dhamma, another one, the second one, Wano, beauty, not just only external beauty, but internal beauty that arises from the practice of the Dhamma. And one, Sukha, happiness. This is really true happiness, not excitement. But whenever we do Dhamma, we're really truly happy. And this happiness that leads us to ultimate happiness, Nibbana. Bala. Bala is strength, spiritual strength to keep on what you're doing. So you listen to the Dhamma and you practice the Dhamma and continue to practice the Dhamma. And then may you be protected by the power of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So I'm going to do in the Pali language. Sabbityo vivajjantu sabbarogo vinasatu mate bhavantantarayo sukhidiga yuko bhava abhivadana sirisa nicca buddha pachayino chattaro dhamma vantante ayuvanno sukham bala bhavatu sabba mangara rakkantu sabba devata Sabba Buddha Nubhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Bhavat Sabba Mangala Rakantu Sabba Devata Sabba Dhamma Nubhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te Bhavat Sabba Mangala Rakantu Sabba Devata Sabba Sangha Nubhavena Sada Soti Bhavantu Te. Sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Thank you for sharing the Dhamma.
Okay, so thank you, Bhante Buddharakita. And now I will do I will lead everybody in a final sharing of the merits. And so now you could sort of sit the sort of semi-meditative position with the eyes closed. And now we're going to first think that through participating in this retreat over the last, from Friday evening through all Saturday, where we've been doing meditation, discussing the Dhamma, expounding the Dhamma, and then also contributing in any way to the work of Buddhist Global Relief, either the staff as the active core of Buddhist Global Relief, the board members, the advisors, or anybody, or the donors who are contributing to our work. Through all of these activities, we generate a mass of what we call of wholesome karma, pure, beautiful karma, which we call in Pali punya or merit. It is the wholesome power of the mind. And now we don't want to just hold on to that merit for ourselves, but we share it with others. And so what we do, first, you bring to mind that massive merit as though it's a bright, radiant light in the heart, shining out from the heart, radiating out from the heart. And then mentally, first you invite all of your loved ones, those who are dear and beloved to yourself, to rejoice in those merits, particularly if there are people close to you, parents, spouse, children, other close friends who have passed away, and you invite them while they're in perhaps the transitional stage between lives to witness your merits and to rejoice in those merits. Okay, and then you direct the mind to the deities, the devas. These are the Dharma protecting devas who keep, we believe, a kind of watch on the activities taking place on the earth. And when we share the merits with them, that encourages them to continue to protect, to uphold the Dharma in the world, to uphold Dharma maybe not only in the sense of Buddhism, but in the broader sense of righteousness and goodness in the world. So from other religious perspectives, we might consider these to be the departed saints or the bodhisattvas. So we share the merits with them and request them to protect the Dharma in the world, to protect goodness, virtue, reason, and to ensure that the world is free from calamity and disaster. And next we think bring to mind the fierce spirits. These are the bhutas or yakshas, which can be fierce. They can be fierce and destructive, but also if we share merits with them, they can turn their energy not to destroying other people, but to destroying the obstacles to the flourishing of goodness in the world. And so we share the merits with them, requesting them to eliminate all of the obstacles to the flourishing of Dharma and goodness in the world. And then finally, we spread the light rays of our merits over the entire world, encompassing all sentient beings, extending to all beings in all the realms of existence. And with our minds, we invite all beings who are able to witness our deeds to rejoice in our merits. Okay, I will conclude with another chant, first in Pali, and then I'll give the English translation. Dukkha patachani dukkha, bhaya patachani bhaya, soka patachani soka, hantu sabbepi panino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu,
Sadhu,
sadhu.
sadhu,
Thank you, dear
sadhu.
Bante.
Sadhu,
Thank
sadhu.
you, everyone.
Okay, so
Thank
that
you,
will
Bante.
conclude.
Thank you,
Thank
Bante.
you, Bante. Thank you,
Okay,
Aya.
so thank you
Thank
again to
you.
everybody
Thank
who
you.
joined us
Thank
today.
you. Thank you. Be
Okay.
safe. Take care. Thank you, all
Okay.
venerables.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bante.
Aya.
Thank you,
Thank
Bante.
you, dear.
Good
Good night,
Bhagavad
everyone.
Gita.
Be safe. Be safe, all
Okay.
venerables. Thank you.
Thank you.
Night.
Get well.